Hello, hello. Do we have people here? Can you hear me? We're struggling with our video, but I think we have the slide presentation up and we do have audio. If somebody can confirm in the chat that they're hearing me, that would be great. Thank you, Reggie. I appreciate it. Perfect. Thank you, Marianne. I'm seeing you guys. Okay, great. I'm going to work for about 60 more seconds to get the video running. If I can't get the video running, we're going to go right through the slides with just the audio. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jim. I can see all your comments. And I want you to know that I'm going to be responsive to those. That one of the things that we're going to do different about this webinar once we get going is I'm going to allow everybody to actively engage. We're going to have a continued dialogue here rather than doing a Q&A at the end. So I'm watching the chat, and that looks like it's going to be the way for us to communicate. So let's get going. Actually, I don't think we're going to get the video going, you guys. We had a weird thing happen. We have a storm going on here this morning, and big windstorm, and we lost all power at the ranch this morning, all internet. So we're back up and moving, and I super appreciate everyone's patience. Okay, can you guys see the slides? I guess I should ask that. Are you guys looking on the screen and seeing the slides? Anybody? Let me know that we're seeing the, okay, perfect. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I'm gonna move right through these. Thank you, Christian, I appreciate it. So I'm gonna go back and revisit and elaborate on a little bit, a couple of the things we talked about last time. I'm not gonna be too redundant here, but there have been a few changes and developments in the last couple of weeks since we did this first webinar. And so I'm gonna revisit some of our slides around the USDA interim final rule and then move on. So the first one you see highlighted here is I just want to clarify, because there's been a lot of confusion about this, that this IFR became a rule effective October 31st, 2019, and is running through November 1st, 2021. October 31st, 2019, running through November 1st, 2021. So we're under this IFR right now. And I know there's been some debate because of that 60-day comment period, but I just want to be clear that here, this is an excerpt from the IFR stating that we had started on this on October 31st. Also want to state that it looked like we are going to be on this rule until they put the final rule out on October 31st, 2021. At least that's when they're saying they're going to finish the comment period. And that's worth noting because with all of these comments, we ended up pulling back. That's one of the changes that they did. They were originally going to look at this for 2 years and then go back, as I understood it, and go ahead and implement the rule. But I think because of all the comments and concerns that we've all expressed, they've decided that 2 years is too long, and they're going to come back and look at that next year, which is wonderful for us because I do anticipate that they're going to make some changes to it. I do think, and I'd love to hear anybody's feedback on this, but I do think they're going to make some changes around the total THC testing requirements. They're seeing that a lot of people are struggling to meet that, and it's a big concern to people. So I think that that's one of the things that we will likely see change. Okay, and here's, on that note, a lot of feedback right now about the IFR and where we are. A lot of concern, a lot of chatter. We've got Merkley and Widen Up making a lot of noise about it. I think we've got Mitch McConnell making a lot of noise about it. And one thing that I did see that I wanted to point out is they are considering, I've heard Sonny Perdue talk about moving the date that they're going to move off of these programs, these pilot programs, to December 31st instead of October 31st. I guess that's worth touching on is when they put this IFR out, and I think most people know this, so I won't go too deep into it, but they allowed states to remain on their pilot programs for a year. And where they put that cutoff is in a really odd time for farmers at October 31st, meaning here farmers have just come in with their harvest, probably getting all their testing done, and they're going to change the rules and pull the pilot programs out from everybody. So I think that was a really smart play that was driven by probably a lot of your chatter and certainly some of ours as well. But yeah, there will be some changes to this thing. There will be some changes to this thing. Okay, so here's the new graphic we put together, and this is some of the developments that have happened literally since we put the first webinar in place. This one right here talks about the 2014 pilot rules and the states that have chosen to go onto the pilot program, continue on their pilot program until October 31st. And there are quite a lot of them. Initially, we had just a few states, Oregon, Colorado, I think we're looking at, but it looks like we have 19 states now that have decided to stay on their pilot program. And fundamentally what that means is those states should be Delta 9 compliant states. So all of the seed that you guys see that's Delta 9 compliant out there on the market, these are the 19 states that I believe have adopted their pilot program or chosen to stay on their pilot program until either October 31st or December 31st. So this is good news for farmers, everybody who's panicking about the genetics not being available for them. Well, now we have 19 states that all of the cherries and Trumps and Stormy Daniels and Electras and Lifters and these other varieties that were bred to be Delta 9 compliant can work in, which is really a great thing for farmers, like I said. Now, the flip side of that is we have these states, these 11 states that either have adopted an approved plan, a state approved plan that's under the IFR and falls in line with it, meaning that they're looking at a total THC compliance, or they're opting to use no state plan. And so that just puts them right under the USDA guidelines. So if you're in any of these states, it's worth noting that, and we have a cross section of people from all across the country here today, it's worth noting that these are the states that have made a decision to be total THC compliant. So when it comes to these states, you have no choice but to watch for that total T compliant. It puts you in a very limited position for genetic selection. So I just want to make sure that the guys in those states are really paying attention to the varieties that are available on the marketplace for them. And I do want to point out that if you're operating in either of these arenas, it's important to recognize that you're still going to be bound to federal testing or federal standards when it comes to interstate commerce. So if you're operating in a state that's got a Delta 9 program and you don't have a processor in state, or you are looking to perhaps move your product to smokable, you're going to want to really pay attention to the fact that the interstate commerce is going to put you in an awkward position, because then you're on the federal law. It's also become apparent to us that some of the states are waking up to what the USDA is doing, and the way I would call it is I think they don't want to be too far out of line with what the federal standard will be, so they're creating some post-testing or batch testing requirements to try and show that even though they're Delta 9, they have some consideration for the federal law and interstate commerce. And Oregon in particular, I think, is mandating a 30-pound batch test on any product that has been modified or manipulated in any way. So if you're going to trim your product, you're going to have to do a batch test on it. But I really want to point out that even if you're not doing that batch test, I think a lot of us have gotten into the practice over the last 3 or 4 years of being able to ship product from state to state on our pre-harvest test report. And I think it's worth noting that that may change this year, that we may see a little bit more strict policies when it comes to moving stuff from state to state on a pre-harvest test report, because I think pretty much everybody here knows that your pre-harvest test report and your product after harvest have a different cannabinoid content. So have I solicited any questions from anybody thus far about what we've touched on? Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to just cruise right through this thing because I know that we need to keep this a little shorter since we got a little bit of a late start for everybody. I want to make sure we get through everything and give everyone an opportunity to certainly come back with some questions. Now, this is a slide that we did use in the first webinar, but I want to revisit it because I think this is a good baseline for everybody to be looking at. When you're going to purchase seed from a seed provider, you want to see a comprehensive certificate of analysis. Most of the seeds that we're purchasing now are feminized, so if you are not purchasing regular seed, you're going to want to see a pretty comprehensive feminization test. I would say that no less than 100 sites is going to give you a good cross-section of what the true feminization rates are. And then I would also say that you want to see a state-run germination test and ideally a purity test. Purity test is what's going to allow you or allow a seller to provide seed to your state. So there's sort of reciprocity among these purity tests, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it, because purity is trying to determine noxious weed seed or foreign crop or foreign seed, so foreign crop seed or foreign matter. And that's really what Department of Ag is looking for when they're taking seed from Oregon to Texas or anywhere else around the country, per se, that we don't contaminate their fields. So I'm starting to see more and more of them pop up, but it's something that up until maybe 6 months ago, not very many people were doing them. And I think it's important that, as farmers, that we start to hold these seed producers to sort of the standard that outside of industry seed producers have to adhere to, and that's one of them is this purity test. And I know we talked a little bit about licensing too. You're going to want to make sure that your seed provider is licensed to produce seed in their state, but also licensed to sell seed in your state, because every state for the most part has some requirement for a seed producer to be able to sell seed in their state. And a lot of them even come with a tax burden. So if you sell a certain amount of seed in a state, then you're going to have to pay a tax to that state for the seed that you sold. So it's important that we're kind of holding these guys to the fire, as far as our feet to the flame, as far as making sure that they're doing things right. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys an example of a couple of different COAs and how you can sort of work through the different formats. So this one here on the left, I want to point out that they're starting to be a lot better about prominently displaying both Delta 9 and total THC, which are the components that you're looking for. So the COAs of these labs, a lot of them came out of the recreational side of things, and so they are used to trying to really display high THC numbers prominently, or certain other components prominently that don't really play so much into hemp. So it's nice that they're waking up and starting to give us the numbers that we see. So here you can see you've got on this one your CBD A, and then down below they've done a really good job of putting your max active CBD and your max active THC, and you can see on this one it's a 0.71. Now, giving you guys another tool as to how to look at these advertisements, because a lot of times these guys aren't putting up COAs, and you can push a lot of stuff by the wayside or get a better understanding of what works for you by understanding a little bit about these ratios and how they work. So we've taken two examples here. On the left, I've got an example that's going to show you this conversion. So they're showing a 16.29% total cannabinoids, and this is actually a really close to compliant variety, the Super T1, because if we take it down and we add the CBD and the CBDA, you're getting the total 14.62. Now we're going to take that, the equation that we use to determine total THC is actually Delta 9 THC plus the THCA times 0.877. So that's not an equation that I created. That's the standard equation for determining total T based on decarboxylation. So again, you've got a 0.26 plus your 0.14 times 0.877 gives you a 0.3827. You guys can go back and kind of do this math on anything that you're looking at, meaning if there's a hole in their numbers, here's the equation for you to kind of figure out where they stand in the true compliance thing, in a true compliance picture. And I would also point out here on the other side, that we have a special sauce, and their claims are showing that. Forgive me, I can't quite see the number on it, but so they're showing 20% on this, right? They're claiming a 20% CBD content. And so this is where we do a little bit of reverse engineering. I want you guys to know that pretty much the peak that we're seeing right now as far as a THC to CBD or CBD to THC ratio is about a 30-1. And I think across the industry, you're going to see that being a high standard. We see a lot of 24, 25-1s, and then we'll see occasionally anomalies that are 33, 35-1. But if you guys see a guy claiming a 20% CBD number, you can just take that and divide that number by 30, giving them, the benefit of the doubt that they have. Okay, I see Jose. Does everybody else have audio? I see. I just got a comment that someone has lost audio. Somebody let me know. And Peter, okay, perfect. Peter's making the comment. So Peter just made a comment. He says you have to do the decarb calculation on CBDA as well. So you are absolutely correct, Peter, that if we were going to get the numbers correct, it's the same equation for CBDA to get you down to the 0.877. You are absolutely correct, and thanks for pointing out that flaw. So again, going back and taking these 20% numbers, it's pretty easy to debunk that or kind of get an idea as to where they are by running those ratios. And just keep in mind, 30-1 is a pretty high ratio. So if you're seeing something that is showing you 50-1 or 60-1, that's something that raises a red flag for you. If you see 20%, now you can go back through. Here's a tool for you guys to be able to run the math. You can run the math on someone's claims on percentages, and now you can also run the math for the true total THC conversion. So hopefully that will be helpful. It's funny, I'm getting some people with no audio and some people with audio. So again, appreciate you guys understanding that, the technical difficulties here. We usually have very good internet, but we've got a storm outside with like 50, 60 mile an hour winds. Okay. Now this is our lead off of really, I think, what we got here to talk about. I did want to kind of cut through and recap on some of the changes that we've seen for compliance, and certainly go over a little bit of what we had talked about last time. But here's kind of why we're here today, really, is to talk about the importance of genetic selection and really looking beyond the THC and CBD numbers, because we're really hung up on that right now. And, as soon as we get off of that, we can look at all these other components and variables like, does this plant even grow well in my environment? But I wanted to point out here, this is a study by Dr. Larry Smart of Cornell University, and there's a lot of debate about this. You see a lot of people talking about environmental influence having a dramatic impact on their THC content. Now, I would say to you that we do, that is true. We do see that a little bit. I mean, just generally, if you feed a plant the right nutrition, you're going to be able to increase the resin content. So there is some truth to that, but I think after studying 217 hemp varieties, what these guys came up with is that this is really set in the genetic code. So your ability to stay compliant is going to be based on stability and the genetic code. So this is why this is really important that we look at not just the COA when we're picking up genetics, but that we look at the genetic code and are these plants that are going to work well for our environment. So I do want to start by using a tool that we had used before. So we had brought up this Pennsylvania Ag Department's hemp varieties of concern. And then we hit, on there also Kentucky's Department of Ag's summary of their varieties and varieties of concern. And the reason that I wanted to highlight this particular slide is I want to talk about, just for a quick second, the genetic variability in open source varieties. We did touch on it previously, but with hemp, we're mostly in a filial 1 version of these plants. That's how we're providing stability out to the marketplace, is through filial 1 mother stock, because filial 1 tends to reproduce pretty truly the parent to offspring traits. Now, if you go to filial 2, 3, all the way up to 7, you start to pull up all the recessive traits. And this is important because where we're at right now, we had a few varieties go open source. And as far as in the patent world, these people were allowed to either profit from their product or hold it back and not release it for sale and go through the process of patent. So early on, a lot of these varieties were released, and cherry is a really good example. So I wanted to show you what we had seen on here, because I hear a lot of people talk about cherry, and I'm not picking on it. I mentioned last time that it's an HGH strain, HGH variety, and if you purchase this variety from HGH, you're going to get it from a filial 1 mother stock, so you're going to have a true picture of what cherry is. But what I wanted to point out is on the left here, we have a cherry BD, they're calling it, and it's highly compliant. It's testing at a 0.179 on the THC, which is wonderful. Now you go across to Kentucky Department of Ag and you go to what they're calling a Chab cherry, another variant of cherry, and you're seeing one test above 1%. So there's the spread. You can have in the same variety, essentially, same genome, they're calling it, you can have a below 0.3 and you can have an above 1%. So I think it's worth noting that when you're looking at your varieties, you want to make sure that you're choosing varieties from the breeder wherever possible. Breeder's done the work to stabilize the varieties. Breeder's done the work to develop them, test them, get all the analytics, and they're the ones who are going to have the truly stable stock for you to reproduce. So just be mindful when you're looking at any variety that you want to be talking to the actual breeder and producer. Okay, now this is something that I know when we put it on the email, I think people were wondering, is he going to be talking about recreational cannabis now, or is this hemp? Because we're talking about the difference between indica and sativa. But it's worth noting that when we're talking about hemp for CBD production, we are talking about a pretty unique animal of a plant. And almost all of these plants are drug-based cultivar anomalies. So they are these strange oddball plants that were found out of mostly THC hybrids. And the hybrids can be leaning highly indica or they can be leaning highly sativa. So when we get into industrial hemp for grain or fiber production, we're generally leading primarily towards sativa. And then, when we talk about the other third component that's in there, which is ruderalis, that's generally designed to work more towards day neutral plants or non-photoperiodic dependent plants. But we do have 3 different components to this hybrid. So now that we're in the drug-based cultivar anomaly, when we're talking about CBD production, a lot of these things come from plants that were 50-50 hybrids or 60-40 hybrids of sativa and indica. One of the foundation lines that we bred off of here is a genetic called the Oracle. The Oracle is a straight up hybrid. It's a 50-50. Now, the reason this is important for all of us as farmers to understand is that these plants historically come from different regions in the world. And of course, they're designed or have evolved to grow in different climates, different environments. Some of these plants are highly frost resistant. Some of them are highly mildew resistant. Some of them are very drought tolerant. And a lot of that has to do with the hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, natural evolution, in the environment in which they were naturally from. So I guess I would like to touch a little bit on the idea that, when you're looking at a plant, the taller, longer internodal spacing plants are going to be more sativa leaning, and your shorter, broader leafed, tighter internodal spacing plants are going to be your indicas. Now, pretty much across the board, when I look out at cherries, I look at electras, I look at suvers, I see strong hybrids. And I think it's important that you guys are just aware of the difference in your genetic selection, and that you ask your seed provider to kind of help you to understand the lineage of their varieties. And so just in general, what I would say is that if you're in a high drought environment or low water environment or high heat environment, that you're going to want to look for something that's going to be like an 80-20 sativa. If you're in a wet environment, you're in an environment that has some frost potential, a lot of times you're going to want to be looking at something that leans a little bit the other direction into like an 80-20 indica. Now, a lot of this hybridization, when we do these selections, you don't know what's going to be resistant to what. You can kind of take a guess just from historically where these plants have come from. But what you find are in these hybrids that some of the hybrids will carry the drought tolerance of a sativa and have more indica looking structure. Some of them will carry the frost resistance of an indica but have a more sativa looking structure. So not only do you want to know which direction the hybrid leans, I mean, that's a great start to give you an idea as to what might work well in your environment, but you also want to know the analytics. And so anywhere possible, you'd like to see data or field trials from where this stuff is grown. But just in general, know that if you're going to be in an extreme environment, you're going to want to look at the hybrid that leads one way or the other. And I'd be more than happy to drill down on that, and even entertain some dialogue, because we have some very intelligent and experienced people here in cannabis and hemp about how people feel about which hybrids do best in which environment. And I guess the last thing that I did touch on in the beginning that I do want to maybe address is that we have cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. The ruderalis varieties are generally what we use in breeding to help remove photoperiodic dependence. And there's a great benefit to that. If we can have a plant that's staying neutral, and I know a lot of guys in here are aware of autoflowers now, that can add a lot of benefit in certain environments. So I just want to be clear that that third component is generally what all the breeders are breeding in for photoperiod dependence or lack of. And here's a really good example on this next slide of what I'm talking about shown in a field trial. And anywhere you guys can see this is what you want to see. But with us in particular, we've bred really tough varieties out of American feral stock, and that 25% American feral stock, which is in most of our lineage, translates to some pretty hardy plants. So here on this University of Vermont trial, we are looking at a mildew study, and this is a 14-page study. You guys can find it anywhere you want. Matter of fact, we'd be happy to include a link to it. They ran 30 different varieties, I believe, 5 of ours last year. And you can see they ran these up in Vermont, right on the border of Canada, and Apollo, 88, Painted Lady, Skipper, all came out pretty much impervious to mildew. And that's one of the things that we see and we've bred for. Now, I think you guys will start to see, or anybody who's grown our varieties will see, that we did lean a little bit more into the sativa side. The traditional lineage that the founding fathers brought in here that proved to be hardy and last tends to be a little bit taller and lankier, so it made a lot of sense to us. We weren't barred to or stuck to the idea that we should be breeding a short stocky plant for outdoor environments. So I'll just be clear with you that that's a lot of why we've come up with frost resistance, pest resistance, mildew resistance. Is because of those lineages that we use, and they just happen to be primarily sativa. So I think that actually sums up the slides right there for today. I know that was a quick run through, but I felt like I had to kind of blast through it since I was a little bit late getting on, and I really appreciate everybody's patience. I promise you we will not do that again. We'll be way ahead of the game. That was just a very oddball experience to have the power go out right when we're getting ready to come live with you guys. But I'm reading the chat bar. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to start some dialogue. That was sort of my download to everybody real quick, a little different than last time, but I'm hoping that, we can solicit a few questions, or that we can get some dialogue going. Yes, Rick, I will happily send out a copy of the presentation. Thank you, Ryan. Of course. And anything that we can do to get this word out there. I think this is a critical thing for farmers this year, just to have an understanding. There's no reason we shouldn't plant. We have an incredible opportunity to change a lot of things. I think we've led in wonderfully through cannabinoids, and you start to see the conversation change a little bit and open up. I think fiber and grains coming on, and I bet just about everybody on this phone call has an understanding of what that means to us. Well, I'm going to give it about 2 more minutes here, watch the chat, and if anybody else, of course, Dale, happy. And we'll happily send you a copy, William. Absolutely. Of course, Mike. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I know your time is valuable. Oh, there is one thing that I'm being flagged to mention, and this is very personal to us, but I want you all to know about it. Thanks, Jonathan. That we have released 6 varieties this year that are all Total T compliant, and I think most people who know us know that that's what we're leaning for. We're leaning towards a federally compliant variety for everybody to grow. That's it. But so we've released 6 varieties this year, and we're getting ready to release a 7th. And I want everybody to know, just be aware of it, that what we're doing here, and I'll get back to your question in a second, Barrett, but we are releasing a 7th variety here in May. And that variety is called Bhutan Glory. And that variety is named after a Tibetan butterfly. Somebody that means a lot to us here at the farm is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we have been given an opportunity. It turns out that the Dalai Lama will not be reincarnating again. He's made that statement after so many reincarnations. He's chosen not to come back. And instead, he's chosen to create a library in Ithaca, New York, at their monastery. They have 2 monasteries. One's in Nangal, India, and one is in Ithaca. And that library, they've been looking for funding for the library. And so what we're doing is, I've got a friend who works very close with His Holiness and who's also in the cannabis space. And we have decided to do an altruistic collaboration where we are going to produce the seed here, this Bhutan Glory, release it, and all of the proceeds from that will go to will be donated to His Holiness and the library. So I just want you guys to know that when that's coming out. If you guys want to get behind it, I'd appreciate it. If you guys want to spread the word, if anybody is a supporter of His Holiness, this is a great opportunity for them to contribute to his library and his history. Yeah, I hope I explained that well, Ryan. It is intriguing to me. Okay, so I'm going to get back to Steve right now. Steve asks us, "Hi all, I'm on the MD Eastern Shore, and we have high winds throughout the grow season and high humidity in the fall. Which your cultivars would be a good growth vector for the wind and mold resistance for the wet fall?" So the wind, so we have some shorter stockier varieties, and the funny thing is, I actually find that the looser, taller, broader internodal space varieties stand up to the wind a little bit better. You might want to plant them a little bit later so that you don't have 7-8 foot tall plants, so that you have 4 or 5 foot tall plants. But as you've seen, all of our plants do very well in high humidity. They're almost impervious to mildew, which, growing up in the state of Oregon, the coastal areas are just brutally wet. So we can get 30 days of 100% humidity right at the time that you've got all the weight stacked on your flowers. So botrytis, powdery mildew, mud rot, these are all things that are super common to us. So Steve, what I'd say to you is, we can talk about it further, but you could really get away with using any of the varieties that we have in there, other than the Skipper. The Skipper and Sylphina. Those 2 are a little bit more dry climate varieties, but our Painted Lady, our 88, our Purple Emperor, those are all wonderful for that environment. And they've done very well in Virginia, and like I said, Vermont, North Carolina. So we've been in some humid environments. And here last year, we had plants that, the way that farmers were telling us, the plants next to ours were melting, but ours were standing up to the heavy rain. Okay, what is my opinion about farmers breeding CBD cultivars with feral hemp genetics? And there are some states doing it. Well, that's interesting. We actually just read an article yesterday about a guy in Illinois who in 2019 set out to start working with American feral genetics, that he thinks these may be the key to hardy plants and mildew resistant plants and plants that are federally compliant. And you know what? He's right. So that's why we're 5.5 years down the road on this. I'm a strong believer in American feral hemp genetics. So our story, Barrett, is that we went out and collected, or had access to, I'm not going to say that I hand collected them, 423 American feral seeds from 7 states. In 2015, we went about a breeding program with those, where we germinated all those seeds, selected 96 for the field, put 96 in the field, kept 5 males back that had the traits that we wanted. Then at the end of the season, we identified 22 of those 96 that were worth pushing forward. We did a semi-open pollination run indoors with the 5 males and the 22 females, from which we created about maybe 150,000 to 180,000 seeds. That became the baseline of that 25 to 50% of our breeding program. Okay, can I elaborate on terpenes and how they protect the plant? Certainly, Dale Petersdorf. Yeah, well, terpenes do a couple of different things. So one, terpenes are communication tools, and a lot of times they're communicating with pests in the environment or communicating with plants to produce better pest resistance. So one example I'll give you there is farnesene. Farnesene is a terpene that the cannabis plant produces, and the only other place that we find it in nature is it's the chemical signature that an aphid gives off when it's dying. So pretty clear that the plant is making this to say, hey, get the hell away from me. This year we actually had some unique COAs come back, where we had 2 farms in Virginia, 60 miles apart, same strain, same variety, painted lady. One terpene profile came out with high amounts of farnesene, one came out with none. Well, based on what I just told you, I think we can have a pretty good idea as to what the plant was doing there. But the point is, the plant produces, I think, 126 different mono and sesquiterpenes, all for different purposes. The other side of that, Dale, is not only communication tools, but terpenes are VOCs. So part of what they do is they can give the plant more frost resistance. So if you have a high terpene content plant, or a plant that comes on with terpenes early, it's going to have a better frost resistance in the environment, generally speaking. And a VOC, for those who don't know it, those are volatile organic compounds. So both cannabinoids and terpenes are VOCs, but terpenes are highly volatile. So just so you know, they're the first things that disappear in the environment. They're the most volatile of all the compounds of the terpenes. So they're the quickest to dissipate in the environment to exposure to heat or light. Okay. Okay, and how often does hemp, I got Jason Cragholm saying, how often does hemp test hot for one farmer per year usually? So and please, Jason, if I'm not getting the question right, definitely let me know. But I would say that you're going to increase cannabinoid content all the way through the season. And if you're doing a pre-harvest test report and it's compliant, if it's close on the edge, probably 2 weeks later when you're harvesting, your plants are going to be hot. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, Dale's asking us what separates our company and relationships versus other seed companies. Well, I think one of the big things with us, Dale, is that your success is our success. Farmers' success is our success. Farmers' failure is our failure. As a seed producer and provider, we are adamant about saying that every single seed that goes in the ground of ours is harvested at the end of the season and has some value. We are also a boutique seed company where we tend to be a little bit higher touch. We're only producing a small amount of seed, about 13,000 acres a year, which is a drop in the bucket. We don't have a desire to get much larger than that. We do like the high touch, and we do like the high success rate of our farmers. So I'd say those are a couple of things that separate us. I guess company culture. I have 30 years in the cannabis space. I'm very passionate about the plant. I recognize that hemp is food, fuel, fiber, and medicine, and some of the greatest versions of all of those things. And what can happen here if we break this wide open is pretty unreal. We can be talking about replacing all plastics. We can be talking about replacing all fuel, anything that oil and gas produces. We can certainly come out with better textiles. It's fascinating that now we're seeing even Hemp fiber, woven hemp fiber products began to challenge carbon fiber products in race cars. So there's just a huge amount of potential for us, both in food, fuel, fiber, and medicine. And I guess I should say food side, omega-6 and omega-3 ratio, perfect for the human body. When we start talking about even animal feeds, it's a very, very big opportunity for us. And medicine, I think we all know, because we're producing CBD right now, how powerful the endocannabinoid system is, and how amazing the CB1 and CB2 receptors are for human health. I think we're talking about, being on the cusp of eliminating things like Alzheimer's, dementia, certainly making a dent in cancer, diabetes, MS, ALS. So all of these things we see an impact on. So I guess that's it, Dale. Those are the things that separate us. Passion. And you bet, Dale. I'm happy to, Dale Petersdorf, I'm happy to explain. And I guess I would say, he's talking about robust terpene profile. So Dale Petersdorf knows a little bit about our genetics. And I think it's worth noting that we tend to have about double the terpene content of most genetics on the marketplace. So I'll give you an example. There was a contest this year at the Emerald Cup. The Emerald Cup's the big event in Santa Rosa. It's a big cannabis event, and they did a hemp flower contest. And the winner, Reggie Weedman, is the one who told me this. The winner was 1.7% total terpene content. We consistently have field results that are 3.5 to 3.8%, just under 4%. Those are field results. So in the field, you're going to see the most volatility. You're going to see the least amount of terpene retention. So that kind of gives you an idea. That makes our genetics very pest resistant and very frost resistant. So Greg Mooring is asking how other seed producers in Oregon are reacting to our genetics in the market for 2020. Well, initially there was, I think, a lot of concern because there are not very many federally compliant genetics in the marketplace right now. And we worked really hard to provide farmers with that tool. We saw in the 90s and then again in 2014 that it was clearly stated that we weren't going to be testing just a quarter of the THC, the Delta 9. We were going to be testing total, and we saw a train wreck coming. Those genetics are very hard to produce. Matter of fact, as a byproduct of that, we have several varieties that fall into Delta 9 compliance. It's not a problem to get an 18, 17% producer that is at a 0.6 or 0.7 total THC. Now, fast forward a little bit, they were really concerned in the beginning, and we were getting some sort of negative feedback. People mentioning that maybe our genetics were a biological impossibility and that we weren't honest about it. But now what I'm seeing, and it's great, there's a good balance. So 19 states have opened up, as we talked about, for Delta 9 and staying on their pilot program. And I think what that's doing, Greg, is it's taken just enough pressure off of that transition that it's given them an outlet for their seed, which is great. I mean, no facet of the industry should be left behind. Every breeder has worked really hard to develop the varieties they have. And although we had the foresight, it was a hedge. It could have just as easily been that we never saw total THC compliance, and our genetics would have only been valuable because of their ability to grow in fringe environments and have high yield potential or high terpene potential. But the way that it's working out, everything is coming out to a nice balance. And I'm not seeing a lot of pushback from anybody these days, Greg. Well, I think I answered everybody. If anybody else has a question, please. And you all know, everybody that's on this webinar, all friends, everybody here, even if I haven't met yet, all friends. So, you have access to me. When we talk about high touch, that's no joke. We're happy to be here. Until I have no bandwidth for it, this is what I want to do. This industry needs it. We're in our infancy. And if we don't roll this out right, we squander an incredible opportunity, not only for the planet and for future generations, but for farmers in the immediate future right now. So just be clear that I'm here. If you don't have my number, you can get it from me. You can always reach out to me. And, as the questions come up, I'll be here to answer them. To me, this is really about education. So Brandon Bendler just come up with any info on tissue culture in hemp breeding. So we say a lot of tissue culture, and I think tissue culture is really important because now we're touching on a whole other topic that is a big problem for me, and that's pest pathogens and viruses and spreading those around from state to state. So I'm a big proponent of not bringing live plant material into another state just because I recognize historically when we talk about 100 and 150 years of farming, we've had a lot of uh, partial tragedies, close calls where we've cross-contaminated over and over again. So we are, big into sterile plants, and that's something that you can do. You can take a tissue culture and you can assay it. So I would say from baseline breeding stock or for any live plant material that you want to bring across state lines, tissue culture is a really good option for preservation. And of course, I'll take that moment to tell you, Brandon, that we're very proud that what we have here is a breeding facility that's indoor that retains all of our filial one mother stock in a pest, pathogen, and virus-free environment. We move those out into production facility where we produce the seed, but we're always starting with a pest, pathogen, and virus-free environment and mother stock. And I'll tell you a little story that I learned is, so I always would tell people viruses and pathogens are extremely intelligent. They can likely embed the predisposition for that virus or pathogen in the environment into the genetic code. But I never believed that they could embed the actual virus into the genetic code. And since I've learned that verticillium wilt, as I understand it, has the ability, and we had a big problem with that in Oregon in the mint industry here like 20 years ago, but it has the ability to embed itself in the genomic sequence of the seed and potentially contaminate someone else's field. So when you talk about tissue culture, it's the only responsible live plant form that we can move from state to state. Other than that, it's seeds. So I'm glad that you bring that up. And I think, when we start to, so you talk about germplasm, when we start to spread our germplasm out from place to place, or we get other germplasm that we want to develop, it should all be virally assayed before it goes to new breeders, forward to other breeders. It'd be a very responsible thing for us to do. Okay, I have Jim Larsgaard says, do we have any variety suggestions for North Dakota? Yes, as a matter of fact, 3 of our varieties are going to do very well there. I'm, again, really proud to say that some of our field trials in No Plant 19, although we didn't want to see farmers suffer that hard, really showed us what the plants are capable of handling. And give you an example, in Montana, we had varieties that were exposed to 26 degrees, 8 hours sustained, 3 nights in a row, and had almost 0 frost damage. And during those 3 nights, it decided to snow in Montana and snowed 3 inches on top of the plants. The farmer thought he was done. When the snow melted and the freeze was over, the plants were standing, resilient, and still made it to harvest. Very healthy, very happy plants. So we bred for you, Jim. We bred. I'm at 4,280 feet in elevation in Central Oregon. That it gives me the ability to induce a lot of epigenetic influence on what we're working with, meaning we can expose it to super cold, super hot, super wet, super dry. And so we've really focused on breeding plants for specific microclimates and bioregions. We have you covered, Jim. And thanks for sharing the message. And Mike, this is what we need to do. Mike Kanowitz says, thanks for the education. Looking forward to sharing this information with the emerging hemp market in the Midwest. Please do. Everybody share this stuff. Get it out there. It's really important. It's not about me selling seed or being partial. It is absolutely about getting the education out. Oh, and I'm being reminded to let you guys know that we do offer a free strategy call. So after this, I believe there's a link that you guys can find here that will schedule you a Calendly call. If anyone wants to schedule a 25-minute free strategy call with me, they're more than welcome to, and I'd be happy to jump on and answer any questions that you have. Matter of fact, I encourage you to do that. It's a great way to kind of block out a piece of time from me. And so the link just went up on the chat. I don't know if everybody's able to see the chat, but we can send it out to the list of attendees on the webinar. Yeah, it's a great way to get access to me. Appreciate you bringing that up, Cara. Well, cool. Well, seems like everybody's slowing down. It looks like everybody stuck out around for the whole time. Really sorry again for being late, you guys. We will not do that on the next webinar. The next webinar, we're going to go through a lot about what you do once you get your seed. So I see a lot of brokers out there that are trying to jump on the bandwagon, or I'm sorry, a lot of consultants out there that are trying to jump on the bandwagon and say, hey, look, I want to charge you, $10,000 for the season to come in, or $10,000 for an acre a seat for the season to come in and give you all the tools. Now we're not for that. We like to get the farmer to understand how to do this. A lot of farmers haven't had transplant experience, and we're working on direct seeding, and there are places that we can direct seed, but transplanting is kind of what we've been doing now. So we're going to go through germination process, building infrastructure, temporary infrastructure if you don't have it, to go ahead, some hoops to go ahead and harden out your seeds, how you're going to deal with them for the 2 weeks prior to getting them into the field, and hardening them off to get them into your environment, and then how you transplant and what type of equipment you want to be looking at. So we're going to kind of make that the framework of the next webinar. And, again, be happy to do the Q&A. Really want you guys to know that a lot of why I'm doing this is just to educate. It's really just to get the word out. So certainly spread the knowledge, use any of the slides that you have, ask us if there's any of these slides that you want, or any of this material that you want. We have it in-house. We're happy to share it. All this stuff is available for you guys if you want it. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask. And if you want to talk to me again for 25 minutes, go ahead and schedule a call on the Calendly link. Cool. Reggie Weedman says, thanks for your time again. Very informative and worth the wait this morning. You've checked the boxes on so many important traits, and even if the max THC rule changes, the way these grow and their resilience to environmental extremes makes them a farmer's friend. And he's right. That's really a big part of what we wanted to get on here. And I hope I did a good job of it, is just get people off of a COA. Everything has become about these COAs, and we really need to be asking, hey, how does this do in my environment? Is it frost resistant? Is it mildew resistant? What's the feminization rates? Again, don't get caught on the COA. Really look at and drill down into what these guys are trying to sell you. So I guess that's that, and I will sign off now. I'll wait maybe 30 seconds, see if anybody else has a statement, and then I'll sign off since we still have 30 some odd people hanging out with us. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Jason Greg Holmes saying great job. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate all of you taking the time. Okay, perfect. Mike Edinger says, one last question. Would you consider any of your strains directed more towards extraction versus smokable flower, or are you more hitting that middle ground? Well, I would say that the smokable market has developed. I didn't know it would develop, but boy, it sure did. And now we have, all across the eastern seaboard and plenty of other places in the country, this new smokable flower market. Now, we've been supplying that smokable flower market with non-compliant genetics for the last 2 years. So I want to, really note that I believe our genetics are some of the only high terpene genetics, and high terpene is what makes genetics palatable to smoke, genetics that can be compliant on a trimmed flower. So we have product that will test at 0.27, 0.29, 8.5%, 9% on a trimmed flower with 4% terpenes. So although we really lean towards the middle ground, Mike, and giving someone a good biomass flower as well as giving someone a good smokable, I think you bring up a really good point that we may be some of the only smokable options this year, just because of interstate commerce and you needing to be below that 0.3 threshold. That being said, though, we make great strains for extraction. I'm hoping that we get to some broad spectrum extraction, and then we're going to really see the benefit of our strains, because we have not only CBD and THC, but minors and obviously strong amounts of terpenes, usually 10 or 11 quantifiable terpenes in each strain. And yes, Dale, federally compliant at full maturity. I did not stutter, sir. We have seen it over and over again. That's a big one. Don't fall for the 2-week ahead of time. Our stuff is compliant. Don't fall for, hey, if you test it early enough, it's compliant. We have a joke on the whiteboard here. It says, all hemp strains are compliant if tested early enough. Okay. Perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you guys back here in a couple of weeks. I think because of everybody being stuck a little bit and not getting out, we're talking about not only doing this one to help the people through how to deal with the transplants and hardening and germination techniques, but we're thinking about getting a panel of experts together. If anybody wants to get involved in that, throw their hat in the ring. I think maybe towards the end of April, we're going to get 4 or 5 people together on a panel and really see if we can spread some information and kill some of the misinformation. So that being said, I guess I'm out of here. I appreciate all your support, more than I can say. This isn't my wheelhouse, but I realize how important it is. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Barrett. Thank you, Peter, Jeff, everybody for joining. Have a great day.